You know what? For a bagel where nothing went right, these look pretty damn good. I'm going to show you how we got away with it. Let's go. What you're looking at here is our carefully weighed dry ingredients, 100 grams of sourdough starter. This is a wholemeal starter that's just out of the fridge. We've also got a wonderfully retro whisk and a completely unknown quantity of water. We'll come back to that later. I'm going to put the ingredients up on screen now for a few seconds, pause if you need them. And while you take notes, I'm going to use my funky metal whisk to blend together all the dry ingredients. What you'll notice in the next step after we've made our well is that the water I pour in here looks nothing like 225 millilitres. I like to measure my ingredients precisely. I always use a scale. That works great for dry ingredients. If you're using wet ingredients and you measure water from one jug to another, get rid of your measured jug and then pour the unknown quantity into your recipe, you can end up with what we've got here. That's a super sticky, really overhydrated dough that's more like a ciabatta than it is like a traditional bagel. If you need to see what bagel dough looks like, you can check out my golden syrup bagel recipe on the channel. It doesn't look anything like this. So we're going to cover that up, let it rise, clear up our table, and come back to it after maybe 5 or 6 hours of rising at room temperature on a counter. Once that's done, you should have something like this. We're going to start transferring it to a work surface and trying to divvy it up. Now, as you can see, it's risen, it's fluffy, it's puffy, but it's really jiggly because it's really wet, and that is going to give us a nightmare throughout the next few steps. I've floured my work surface. I'm using a cutting board because I can tell immediately it's going to be sticky. I'm giving it as much work as I think I can get away with. Now, I wouldn't recommend kneading a dough like this. If you do, you're going to end up in trouble. Just fold. When in doubt with a wet dough, keep folding back towards the middle, pulling to build tension and keeping that downwards facing side of the dough down as far as possible. At this stage, bagel dough would normally be firm and elastic and very workable. What we've got is something that's really quite watery, sticky, messy, and difficult to handle. If you do end up in a situation like this, maybe just cut your losses like I do here and get it formed up and shaped up, because that rising time will allow gluten to build a little bit more. The dough will always be easier to handle after it's risen, so that's what I'm doing. I just form up 6 balls, put them in a tray that I can put in the fridge to let them rise overnight, and we'll come back to them in the morning and just hope that things have worked out for the good. I know they're going to stick, so we're going to cover them in semolina both sides. This is again something you wouldn't want to do because, as you'll see later, we're going to fold that into the structure of the dough and you could end up with something that's a little bit too firm. The next morning, they've puffed up, they've held some shape thankfully, and they're ready to be formed into bagels. So I just checked to see where we're at. They're cold and there is some bounce back in the dough, so it's not overproofed. We're ready to go, it's time to shape. I'd almost always advise that you try not to add flour or extra dry ingredients to your dough at this stage, but we have no choice because it's still so sticky. What I'm doing here is folding the opposite sides over to build some tension, rolling out a long snake, wrapping that around my hand, and then pressing down and rolling at the same time to seal it up. We're just going to do that. This is the way that you would form bagels traditionally. Some people poke through the middle. It's okay. You know, it works. Either way works, but I believe this is the more traditional method, so that's what we're sticking with today. Repeat that step for roughly 6 bagels. That's what you'll get out of 500 grams of flour. And when you're done, you just got to let them sit and relax for another half hour and they'll be ready to boil. So, boiling liquid should always have some sweetener in it. That helps to give colour. Molasses is traditional, but I couldn't find that, so we're using treacle. In the UK, I believe treacle and molasses are quite similar anyway. In go our puffy risen bagels into this mixture, and you want to give them 30 seconds to a minute on each side, and I could have gone just a little bit longer to seal them off. You'll notice a rubbery texture develop on the outside skin, and that's what goes on to be the shiny, glossy finish that you'd expect from a bagel. They also puff up a little bit at this boiling stage, but do not despair if they seem a little bit flat. They will still rise in the oven. When they're here, that's time to get them out, let them sit on a rack and finish off the other half. I'm going to skip through that because there's nothing different about doing the second half than the first half. If you've not been firm enough as you rolled that snake together, you'll see splits like that. Again, don't panic. These bagels won't end up perfectly smooth on the outside, but what they'll do instead is burst and rupture and get a really grainy, beautiful textured finish that I think looks just as good or even better in some cases. It's time to bake. I've mentioned this before, but I like to bake on the back of what we would call the grill pan in the UK. It's a very heavy, substantial pan that's as big as the oven. All you do is slide your baking paper with the bagels on it off your chopping board onto that heavy, hot, preheated tray, close the door, give them 25 minutes at 220 degrees Celsius, and there you go. It's bagels. As you can see, as I mentioned, where the surface had split, you get this grainy textured pattern across the top. I think they look beautiful. These worked well for a disaster, and inside, because they've had that extra little bit of hydration, there's an open crumb that worked really, really well. They're not as dense as a traditional bagel. That's a side effect of having more water in the dough. Check it out, and I like to enjoy these with lashings of butter and honey. That goes really well with the cinnamon. They're not as sweet as you might expect from a commercial one, but they are incredibly delicious. Watch that water when you bake these and enjoy.